The air over Nellis Air Force Base shimmered with desert heat, and the rhythmic thrum of engines echoed across the tarmac like a living heartbeat. Captain Alyssa Warren adjusted her cap against the blinding Nevada sun, her boots crunching on gravel as she made her way past the hangar rows. To anyone watching, she looked like the perfect image of composure, sharp, disciplined, unshakable. But beneath that calm, something heavy churned. She'd been stationed at Nellis for nearly 3 years, long enough to know the pulse of the place. Every base had its own rhythm, the subtle language of engines, footsteps, and clipped radio chatter. When something was off, the air changed. It wasn't something you could describe, only feel. And for the past week, the air had felt wrong. She first noticed it on a Tuesday evening while returning from a maintenance briefing. 2 officers stood near Hangar 17, a restricted zone for classified aircraft maintenance. They weren't the usual crew, and their conversation, though hushed, carried in the still desert night. Alyssa caught just a few words as she passed. Diversion plan confirmed. Coordinates locked. The general wants it clean. Quick and silent. The words shouldn't have meant anything. Military operations were full of cryptic code and classified chatter. But something about the tone, tight, nervous, calculated, dug under her skin like a splinter. And that phrase, the general wants it clean. She didn't stop walking, didn't even glance back. Training kept her posture steady. But inside, every instinct screamed, listen. That night, she lay in her barracks staring at the ceiling, the conversation replaying in her mind. Diversion plan, coordinates, quick and silent. It didn't sound like a routine maneuver. It sounded like someone was hiding something big. But who was the general? She pulled out her encrypted tablet and accessed the next week's mission logs. Everything looked normal. Airdrops, training flights, resupply operations. Nothing unusual. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden beneath those codes. By morning, the unease had settled into her bones. She tried to focus on her duties, flight checks, crew coordination, simulation drills, but her mind wandered. When her commanding officer, Colonel Draper, called for her, she snapped to attention. "Captain Warren," Draper said, his tone brisk. "You're being reassigned temporarily to the Command Flight Division. High-level transport missions scheduled for next week. You'll be briefed by General Marcus Leland himself." Her breath caught for a fraction of a second. General Marcus Leland, a legend in the Air Force, brilliant strategist, decorated hero, and one of the youngest generals in U.S. history. But behind the admiration, rumors whispered of his ambition. Ruthless in politics, dangerous when challenged. "Yes, sir," she replied evenly, concealing her apprehension. Over the next few days, Alyssa prepared for her reassignment. But the feeling didn't fade. She began noticing strange things. Unsigned flight orders appearing on secured servers, communication logs overwritten without record, and a few engineers quietly pulled from duty without explanation. Something was happening, and it was happening fast. Late Thursday evening, she stayed behind after duty hours under the pretense of reviewing maintenance logs. Most officers were gone, the hangars dim under flickering security lights. The silence made every metallic sound echo. She slipped into the system terminal in the flight control office and accessed the restricted channel used by senior staff. It was risky, unauthorized access meant court-martial, but her gut told her it was necessary. She scrolled through encrypted memos until one line froze her hand on the screen. Operation Sentinel Phase 3. Coordinate confirmation scheduled via command jet. Transmission clearance. Leland. Command jet. That was a top-level aircraft used only for confidential missions. The kind that even captains like her weren't supposed to question. But what caught her attention wasn't the operation name. It was the coordinate confirmation. Military operations always involved coordinates, but confirmation via aircraft? That was strange. Normally, such data was transmitted through ground-secured channels. Doing it mid-air could only mean one thing. Someone wanted to send information outside the usual eyes. And General Leland's name on it made her stomach twist. She quickly downloaded the log onto a secured drive and wiped her trace, her heart pounding in the silence. For the first time in her career, she was crossing a line, not out of rebellion, but out of duty. As she exited the hangar, she noticed someone watching her from across the lot, a tall figure in uniform. Standing by a black SUV, his eyes lingered on her a moment too long before he turned and disappeared behind the shadows. The next morning, her reassignment became official. "Captain Warren," said a tall officer she didn't recognize, handing her sealed orders. "You'll serve as co-pilot for General Leland's flight to the Central Command Base. Departure set for Friday, 0600 hours. Her pulse jumped. The command jet, his flight. She nodded calmly, though her hands tightened around the folder. Inside, she knew this wasn't coincidence. Whatever Operation Sentinel was, it was happening on that plane. That night, she barely slept. Outside her window, the desert winds whispered against the hangar walls, sounding eerily like voices she couldn't quite make out. She sat up at 3 a.m., staring at her dog tags resting on the nightstand. They reflected the soft light like small mirrors, one engraved word catching her eye: honor. Her father, a former Air Force pilot, had told her before he died, "Honor isn't obedience, Alyssa. It's courage when obedience is wrong." She finally understood what he meant. The next day, she ran a quiet check on the command jet's flight data. The official route was short and straightforward, but a deeper look revealed something off. A second hidden flight path embedded in the navigation file, pointing toward a location near conflict zones in northern Iraq. If that data was transmitted under the wrong hands, it could expose the positions of multiple U.S. units stationed there. Her mouth went dry. The general wasn't planning a mission. He was planning a betrayal. She sat frozen in the cockpit, staring at the glowing control panels, the realization crashing over her like ice water. This was no rumor. This was treason, and she was part of the flight that would execute it. Outside, the desert wind howled through the base fences, carrying sand and silence in equal measure. The sun was setting, painting the sky in blood-red hues. It looked almost symbolic, a warning written in the clouds. Alyssa leaned forward, her reflection faint in the cockpit glass. Her mind raced. She couldn't go to her superiors. Leland was too powerful. If she reported it through standard channels, the warning would be buried, and she'd be branded unstable. The only way to stop it was from inside. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "If I'm wrong, I lose everything. But if I'm right, I save thousands." Her decision was made. From that night on, she began planning, memorizing emergency codes, reviewing override procedures, and copying flight data logs onto a hidden drive. Every move had to be perfect, every action timed down to the second. And though her hands never trembled during flight simulations, they did that night, because for the first time, Alyssa Warren wasn't preparing for a mission. She was preparing for a mutiny. Outside, lightning flashed on the far horizon, brief, silent, and distant. The storm hadn't reached Nellis yet, but it was coming. And when it hit, it would tear through the skies with a fury no one expected. Captain Alyssa Warren didn't yet know that within days, she would be labeled both traitor and hero. But for now, as she stood beneath the desert night, staring at the sleek silhouette of the command jet waiting for its dawn departure, one thought burned in her mind. If I don't stop him, thousands will die. And that was all the reason she needed. General Marcus Leland walked like a man who owned the sky. Every salute snapped sharper when he passed. Every officer straightened a little taller. His uniform was immaculate, his voice steady, his reputation untouchable. To the world, he was the strategist who'd ended 2 hostile sieges without losing a single soldier. To Alyssa Warren, he was something else now. A living question mark wrapped in metals. She met him 2 days before the mission. The meeting room smelled of jet fuel and stale coffee. Leland stood near the window, sunlight cutting across his metals in hard gold lines. "Captain Warren," he said smoothly, turning, "you've been hand-picked for this operation. It's a simple transport flight. Confidential, of course." His eyes, a cold shade of blue, didn't match his smile. "Yes, sir," Alyssa answered, keeping her voice flat. He studied her a moment too long. "You come highly recommended. Disciplined, precise. I value that." She nodded, but something in his tone chilled her. Compliments from men like him were never harmless. When he dismissed her, she walked out with her heart racing. The general's voice had carried confidence, but beneath it, there was calculation. She'd seen the same expression once before, on a superior who falsified reports to protect his career. Leland's eyes had that same predatory calm. That night, Alyssa accessed the personnel database and pulled his recent command logs. She wasn't supposed to, but the system didn't stop her. A captain's clearance reached further than most realized. Her stomach tightened as the data filled her screen. Flight routes that didn't exist on official charts. Coded cargo entries with no manifests. Transfers to private contractors registered under fake subsidiaries. She leaned back, exhaling through her teeth. This wasn't a single operation. It was a network, and Leland was at the center. She highlighted one particular route, C-17 cargo diversion, humanitarian cover. Coordinates pointed toward a remote region straddling 2 combat zones. The same coordinates she'd seen embedded in the command jet's hidden flight path. It couldn't be coincidence. If those coordinates reached enemy hands, Allied troops positioned nearby would be sitting ducks. Thousands of soldiers, not faceless numbers, but people she'd trained with, eaten with, laughed with. Alyssa felt her pulse hammering in her ears. She pushed her chair back, stood, and stared at the dark base outside her window. Every shadow felt like it was watching her now. The following morning brought a subtle change in the air. People spoke quieter. Engineers avoided her eyes. She noticed a new security detail near Hangar 17, 2 guards in unmarked uniforms. When she passed them, one adjusted his earpiece and muttered something she couldn't hear. Inside the briefing room, the atmosphere was crisp, almost ceremonial. Leland stood at the front, pointing at a holographic map. Around him sat 5 senior officers, faces lit by cold blue light. Alyssa entered last, saluted, and took her seat. "Tomorrow's mission," Leland began, "is vital for operational stability. We'll be transferring encrypted data to Central Command. Routine, but time-sensitive. Captain Warren will assist in navigation and security oversight." His voice glided through the room like oil, smooth, controlled, leaving no space for questions. Still, Alyssa raised her hand. "Sir, may I confirm the transmission protocol? Meter clearance is unusual for classified data." For the briefest second, Leland's jaw tensed. Then he smiled, almost fatherly. "Good eye, Captain. The clearance comes directly from Joint Ops Command. Efficiency demands flexibility." The other officers nodded. Alyssa pretended to do the same, though her mind screamed liar. When the meeting ended, she lingered by the door. As the others filed out, she caught fragments of Leland's low conversation with his aide. "Coordinates are verified. Private channel ready." Then quieter. "No interference tolerated. If anyone questions, they disappear from the roster." Disappear. Her breath hitched. He wasn't hiding a mistake. He was orchestrating a betrayal with military precision. That evening, Alyssa drove to the edge of the base, an overlook where desert stretched endlessly toward the red horizon. She sat on the hood of her jeep, the wind whipping her hair, and tried to think. Every instinct said report him, but who could she trust? Leland commanded half the region's intelligence chain. One word from him, and she'd be locked in a psychiatric evaluation before sunrise. She thought of her father again, his gravelly voice from years ago. Courage isn't loud, Alyssa. It's the quiet choice to do what's right when no one's watching. Tears stung her eyes. Then what the hell is right? She whispered to the wind. Her tablet buzzed. A secure message. No sender ID. She opened it, heart thudding. Inside was a single line. They know you accessed the log. Stop digging. Her hands froze. The message deleted itself seconds later. Someone had been watching her terminal. She looked around the barren desert. No movement, no sound but the hum of distant turbines. Yet she felt eyes everywhere. Back in her quarters, she locked the door, pulled the curtains, and powered up her secondary tablet, an offline backup she'd built for emergencies. She transferred every file she'd copied onto an encrypted drive the size of a coin and slid it into her boot. If they were watching her, she'd make sure they couldn't erase the truth. At dawn, Alyssa walked the hangar line as crews fueled the aircraft. Her fellow pilots joked, laughed, tossed wrenches, unaware of the storm building above them. When she reached the command jet, she paused. The craft gleamed silver under the rising sun, beautiful, powerful, deadly. Leland stood nearby, speaking with an intelligence officer. He glanced at her briefly and smiled that same thin, unreadable smile. For a heartbeat, she thought of turning around, of pretending she hadn't uncovered anything. She could walk away, let the machine of command roll on. But then she pictured the maps, those glowing red coordinates over Allied positions, and the laughter of the people she'd never forgive herself for losing. No, walking away wasn't an option. She climbed aboard, checked the instruments, and slipped her encrypted drive beneath a panel in the cockpit, her insurance if things went wrong. "Morning, Captain," said the flight engineer, a young lieutenant, barely out of training. "Morning," she replied softly, forcing a smile. He grinned nervously. "Big honor flying with the general, huh?" Alyssa met his eyes. "Big responsibility," she corrected. As evening fell, she sat alone in the mess hall, stirring untouched coffee. Around her, laughter echoed from the far tables, the ordinary noise of ordinary soldiers who still believed their leaders were incorruptible. She envied them, the simplicity of trust. When she stood to leave, Colonel Draper intercepted her. "Captain Warren," he said, lowering his voice. "Word is, you've been asking questions." Her chest tightened. "Questions, sir?" "About General Leland's mission." She forced a casual smile. "Just clarifying flight parameters." He studied her for a long moment. "You're sharp, Warren. Don't let curiosity cut your wings." Then he walked away. She exhaled slowly, palms sweating. They were closing in. That night, lightning flickered across the desert again, silent, distant, beautiful. Alyssa sat by the window of her quarters, watching it paint the hangars white for a split second at a time. Tomorrow, she would board the plane with a man planning mass betrayal. Tomorrow she would either stop him or vanish quietly, another accident filed away in classified reports. She reached for her dog tags and whispered, "Honor, courage, truth." 3 words. Her father's creed. Then she looked toward the dark sky where the storm brewed and said quietly, "Let him underestimate me." Because beneath General Leland's polished smile and heavy metals, she had seen the truth. The shadow he carried wasn't just corruption. It was murder waiting to happen. And Captain Alyssa Warren had just stepped into his line of sight. The base looked peaceful from above, rows of silver aircraft lined neatly under the morning sun, crews moving with machine-like precision. Yet to Captain Alyssa Warren, every shadow felt like a threat. Every salute carried suspicion. She hadn't slept. Her mind replayed everything she'd learned, the altered flight logs, the hidden coordinates, and the encrypted message that had warned her to stop. But what haunted her most was the face of General Marcus Leland, calm, confident, and certain no one would dare challenge him. He had power. She had truth. And truth alone wouldn't keep her alive. That morning, she sat alone in the mission prep room, staring at her reflection in a stainless steel locker door. Her eyes looked harder than usual, less like a pilot, more like someone walking into a storm, knowing she wouldn't come out clean. "What are you doing, Alyssa?" she whispered to herself. Her mind offered two paths: report him and vanish quietly under the weight of classified denial, or stop him and become the criminal they'd accuse her of being. Neither path ended well, but only one saved lives. She opened her tablet again, scanning through the evidence she'd gathered, the encrypted flight order labeled Operation Sentinel, the duplicate route showing coordinates near Allied units, the secondary data transmission window labeled Phase 3, Command Jet. It was all there, enough to expose him if she could get it to the right people. But once the plane took off, the general would control every communication channel. She couldn't transmit evidence mitter without his notice. Unless... Her eyes flicked to a small switch beneath the avionics panel schematics. Emergency Transmission Relay, ETR. A rarely used failsafe built for crash reports and black box pings. If manually overridden, it could broadcast short encrypted messages on open emergency frequencies, channels even generals couldn't block. She smiled faintly. There was her window. But it meant she had to reach the cockpit controls before Leland executed his plan. And once she did, there would be no turning back. Later that afternoon, Alyssa met with Lieutenant Carter, the young flight engineer assigned to the mission. "Pre-flight inspection?" he asked cheerfully, clipboard in hand. "Yeah," she replied, forcing a calm tone. "Let's make it thorough. No shortcuts today." He laughed. "You sound like my old instructor." She smiled weakly. "Your instructor was right. One missed detail can crash everything." As they moved through the checks, Alyssa subtly disabled the internal camera that monitored cockpit behavior. Just a short circuit in the system diagnostics. No one would notice until too late. She also adjusted the communication frequency panel, routing one of the backup lines through the ETR relay. It took precision and nerves of steel, but by the time the inspection ended, the modifications were seamless. The plane was ready, but so was she. That evening, Alyssa walked to the mess hall, her boots echoing against the concrete. Officers laughed around tables, trading stories, their lives untouched by the storm coming tomorrow. She sat near the window, pushing food around her tray, when Colonel Draper entered. His presence quieted the room. He walked straight to her table and leaned down. "You're on Leland's flight tomorrow," he said quietly. "Yes, sir. You understand what that means?" She nodded slowly. "I do." He studied her face for a moment. "You've got good instincts, Warren. Keep them alive." Then he straightened and walked away, leaving her frozen in confusion. Did he know? Was it a warning? Or just coincidence? She couldn't tell. But his tone carried something, a flicker of understanding, or perhaps fear. Either way, she was more certain than ever that Leland's betrayal reached deeper than anyone dared admit. That night, Alyssa stood outside Hangar 17, staring at the command jet under floodlights. The plane gleamed like a blade, sleek, elegant, built to command the sky. She ran her hand along the cold metal fuselage, whispering, "I'm sorry," because she knew she'd be breaking every oath she'd ever sworn. She climbed inside to perform final checks, alone this time. The cockpit lights glowed faintly blue in the dark. Every switch, every lever felt heavier now. She slid her encrypted drive into the panel compartment she'd hidden earlier, then wrote one final message on her tablet, encrypted under her personal clearance. If this transmission reaches command, the operation has failed. Do not trust General Marcus Leland. Coordinates falsified. Mission compromised. Lives at risk. She saved it in the system cache. If anything happened to her, someone might find it. Her hands trembled slightly as she rested them on the yoke. She remembered her first flight, the rush of freedom, the sense that the sky itself trusted her. Now, that same sky felt like a battlefield. A voice echoed in her head, her father's again. The sky tests those who love it most. She swallowed hard. Then test me, she whispered back. When dawn came, the base buzzed with motion. Fuel trucks rolled, pilots prepped, orders barked through radios. Alyssa walked toward the jet in her flight suit, helmet tucked under her arm. Leland stood by the stairs, speaking to his aide. His expression was unreadable. When he saw her, he gave a curt nod. "Captain Warren. Ready for duty?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Precision and silence, that's all I expect." "Yes, sir." She climbed aboard, heart thundering. Inside, Lieutenant Carter was already at his station. "Morning, Captain," he said, adjusting his headset. "Morning," she replied. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. As she settled into her seat, Leland entered the cockpit, carrying a secure briefcase. He placed it beside his console with the care of someone protecting something priceless. Alyssa didn't need to see inside to know what it held, the encrypted pad that would deliver the betrayal. The engines roared to life, the hum deep and steady beneath her feet. "Tower, this is Command Flight 9 requesting clearance for departure," she said into her headset. "Clear for takeoff, Captain. Godspeed." Her eyes flicked toward the general. He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth twisting in satisfaction. "Take us up," he ordered. As the jet lifted off the runway, the horizon opened before them, golden light breaking over distant mountains. To any observer, it was a perfect flight, just another classified mission. But inside that cockpit, the air was electric with tension. Alyssa's hands gripped the controls tightly, the soft beeping of the autopilot mixing with the steady thrum of engines. Leland opened his case, activated his encrypted pad, and began typing. Lines of code flickered across his screen. Coordinates, command authorizations, transmissions. Her eyes darted between the instruments and his hands. She recognized the interface immediately. It was the same protocol used for battlefield data relays. But it wasn't linked to Central Command. The routing line showed something else. External secure node, unregistered. He wasn't sending to use command. He was sending out. Her stomach turned to ice. Carter glanced at her. "Captain? Everything all right?" "Fine," she said quickly. "Just turbulence ahead." He nodded, unaware. Alyssa's mind raced. This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for. Once he hit transmit, thousands of soldiers would walk straight into a death trap. Her hand hovered near the emergency override switch. One flick, and she could seize control of the aircraft. But once she did, there was no going back. "Captain," Leland said suddenly, without looking up, "set heading 218. Her throat went dry. That heading led straight toward the transmission zone. She forced herself to respond. "Copy that." The plane banked gently. The hum deepened. The timer on his pad began counting down. Transmission in 2 o'clock minutes. Her heart pounded louder than the engines. 2 minutes. She looked out the window at the endless blue sky. No witnesses. No backup. No second chances. Then she inhaled deeply, steadying herself. Her voice in her head was calm now, a calm that comes when fear burns itself away. If I fail, no one will ever know. If I succeed, no one will ever forget. She reached slowly for the override switch. The timer hit 0:45. Her hand trembled once, then stopped. She flipped the switch. The autopilot disengaged with a sharp click. The plane jolted slightly, alarms flickering. Leland's head snapped up. What the hell? But Alyssa's voice cut through him, steady, unflinching. Sir, I'm sorry. This flight isn't going where you think it is. For a split second, silence filled the cockpit, the kind of silence that feels like the world holding its breath before everything shatters. Then alarms blared. The jet jolted violently as Alyssa disengaged the autopilot, taking full manual control. Red lights flickered across the control panel. Captain Warren, what in God's name are you doing? General Leland barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Alyssa's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. I can't let you transmit that code, sir. Excuse me? His tone hardened. You're out of line, Captain. I've seen your routing data, she said, voice trembling only slightly. You're not sending to command. You're sending to an external node, someone outside the network. Leland's face froze for an instant. A flash of surprise he quickly masked with anger. You have no idea what you're talking about. Resume autopilot immediately, or you'll be court-martialed for mutiny. She didn't respond. Her hands tightened around the yoke, holding the plane steady as turbulence rattled the fuselage. Carter, the flight engineer, looked between them in disbelief. What's happening? Captain, talk to me. Sit tight, Lieutenant, Alyssa ordered. Maintain system monitoring. Don't touch the comms. Leland rose from his seat. That's an order, Warren. Give me the controls. I'm sorry, sir, she said quietly. Not this time. The general lunged for the control console, but Alyssa anticipated it. She flicked the lock on her side, securing manual override. The cockpit filled with the warning chime of dual input denial. Security override. Code Alpha 3, he began, punching keys on his console. Alyssa snapped. That won't work. I disabled shared authority. This plane answers to me now. Leland's eyes blazed. You're insane? Maybe, she said. But I'm not a traitor. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The engines howled around them, the plane cutting through thin air at 30,000 feet. And Leland leaned close, voice low and venomous. You don't understand what's at stake. Those coordinates you think are wrong. They're the only thing preventing a global incident. You're sabotaging a peace operation. Peace doesn't need secret transmissions to unlisted nodes, she shot back. And it doesn't involve erasing our own units in the field. His jaw clenched. You don't know half of it. Then tell me. He stared at her for a long moment, and for the first time, she saw something in his expression other than arrogance. Something almost like regret, but then it was gone. He slammed his palm on the emergency panel, triggering a lockout attempt. Alyssa yanked the yoke, sending the jet into a sharp climb. The sudden G-force pinned them against their seats. Carter shouted, Captain, we're over limit. You'll stall the engines. Hang on. Alyssa gritted her teeth and pushed the plane into a steep bank. The sky spun violently outside. Leland stumbled, slamming into the side console. The briefcase spilled open, and inside, Alyssa saw it. A slim black drive glowing with red indicator lights. The data transmitter. Her heart pounded. That was it, the weapon. The jet trembled as they leveled out. Oxygen masks dangled from the ceiling, the alarm blaring incessantly. Leland crawled toward the case, but Alyssa reached first. She snatched the drive and shoved it into her pocket. "Give it back," he roared, grabbing her arm. For a moment, they struggled. Two soldiers bound by the same oath, but standing on opposite sides of truth. Carter shouted again, "Captain, we're losing altitude. Re-engage stabilizers," she ordered, twisting away from Leland's grip. He lunged again, this time yanking the throttle lever halfway down. The jet shuddered violently. "Stop," she yelled. "You're going to destroy us all. Better that than let you destroy thousands." With a surge of adrenaline, she elbowed him hard, enough to break his hold. He stumbled back, striking the side panel. Sparks flew. The cockpit filled with smoke and blaring warnings. Carter screamed over the noise. "Engine 2 failure. We're in a spin." Alyssa fought the controls, her arms aching from the force. The plane nosed downward, gravity crushing her chest. She could barely see through the flashing lights. Come on," she muttered through gritted teeth, forcing the yoke forward and cutting fuel to rebalance thrust. The horizon tilted, the sky and earth blurring together. At last, the engine stabilized. The spin slowed. The plane steadied. Her lungs burned as she gasped for breath. They were still alive. Leland slumped back in his seat, breathing hard, face red with fury. "You just compromised a top-secret mission for your ego." Alyssa glared at him. "No, sir. You compromised the United States for your ambition. Do you have any idea who I'm working with? Enough to know they're not wearing our flag." He laughed bitterly. "You think this is about betrayal? You're just a pawn. There are deals beyond your rank, operations beyond your clearance. You can't stop what's already in motion." "Maybe not," she said coldly. "But I can make sure you don't finish it." She glanced at the backup console, the emergency transmission relay she'd rewired the night before. If she could activate it, she could send a short encrypted alert before Leland regained control. But she needed time. "Lieutenant Carter," she said, steadying her tone, "run a diagnostic on the external stabilizer. Keep him busy." Carter hesitated, eyes darting between them. "Ma'am, are we?" "That's an order." He nodded reluctantly and turned back to his station. Alyssa reached under the panel and flipped the ETR cover. The small red button blinked, waiting. She began typing the emergency code sequence. Leland's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" "Finishing what you started," she said. He lunged forward again, grabbing for her hand, but she hit the button first. The cabin filled with a sharp tone. The transmission light turned green. "Emergency signal active." Alyssa exhaled shakily. Message sent. But her relief was short-lived. Leland ripped open the lower compartment and yanked a live power cable free. Sparks burst across the floor. The console went dark. "Not anymore," he hissed. Alyssa grabbed for the backup lever to reroute power, but he was faster. He shoved her against the sidewall. The two struggled, the jet rocking as their fight jostled the controls. Carter screamed, "Stop! You'll crash us." Neither listened. Alyssa finally broke free, slamming the butt of her emergency flare gun into Leland's shoulder. He grunted, staggering back, and she re-engaged the stabilizers. The plane leveled again, barely. Leland leaned against the wall, breathing hard, blood trickling from his temple. He looked at her with a strange calmness now. "You think they'll believe you?" he said softly. "When you land, you'll be arrested before you take 2 steps off this plane." "Maybe," she said. "But at least they'll have the black box." His eyes flicked to the flight recorder panel, and she smiled. You forgot to disable that one. For the first time, his expression faltered. You recorded everything. Every word, sir. He stared at her. Fury, disbelief, and something else. Fear. Elisa steadied her breathing. It's over. He sank slowly into his seat, defeated, but not beaten. His hand slid subtly toward his briefcase again. She noticed. What's in there? She demanded. Leland's eyes met hers, cold and final. Insurance. He pressed a small trigger device inside the case. Elisa's heart lurched. No. The console flashed a new warning. Auto-destruct sequence initiated. 5 o'clock minutes. Her blood ran cold. 5 minutes, he said quietly. That's how long you have to decide whether to die a hero, or land and let the truth bury you. Elisa stared at the timer, the red numbers ticking down mercilessly. 5 o'clock. 4:59. 4:58. Her pulse pounded in her ears. The plane was a bomb now, thousands of feet above the earth. She gripped the controls, face pale but eyes fierce. Then I'll land it before it blows. The cockpit pulsed red with flashing lights, sirens wailing through every speaker. Auto-destruct sequence initiated. 4:59. 4:58. Captain Elisa Warren's breath came shallow and quick. Her palms were slick with sweat as she stared at the numbers ticking down, each second a hammer against her chest. General, what have you done? She shouted, fighting the roar of the engines. Leland leaned back in his seat, his voice unnervingly calm. What I had to do. If I can't finish the mission, no one will. The jet will disintegrate midder, and with it, every trace of your rebellion. Carter's voice cracked. There's a bomb on board? It's a self-destruct failsafe, Elisa said quickly, hands flying across the controls. Military command jets have them in case of capture. Her fingers danced over switches and circuit panels, searching for manual overrides, but the timer kept flashing 4:32. 4:31. Can't we just shut it off? Carter yelled. Not from here, she snapped. It's wired through the security circuit, connected to the general's briefcase. He has the master key. She turned to Leland, fury in her eyes. Cancel it. He smirked faintly. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't. The protocol requires dual authentication. The system recognizes only me and command control. You mean your traitor contact, she shot back. Semantics, he said coldly. Elisa slammed a fist on the console. Then I'll do it myself. The next 30 seconds felt like an eternity. She tore open the side panel, exposing wires and circuits glowing orange with heat. The smell of ozone filled the air. Carter looked terrified. Captain, you can't disarm a self-destruct midder. I can try, she muttered. Her training as a pilot hadn't covered this, but years of working with maintenance crews and emergency drills had taught her the logic of systems. Every bomb, every protocol had a heart and a weakness. Hand me the toolkit under the seat. Carter scrambled to obey, sliding the metal box across the floor. Elisa flipped it open, her fingers shaking as she pulled out pliers and a small screwdriver. The timer hit 3:52. Okay, she whispered to herself. The signal runs through two main relays, ignition and confirmation. If I break one, it'll stall the circuit long enough to override. She hesitated, her eyes scanning the tangled maze of wires. Blue, red, yellow, green, each pulsing faintly with current. One wrong cut could trigger detonation instantly. Which one? She muttered. Come on, think. Behind her, Leland's voice was almost gentle. You're wasting time, Captain. Even if you stop the timer, the data is already sent. Her head jerked up. What? He smiled thinly. You think I'd rely on one channel? Redundancy is rule number 1 in strategy. That pad transmitted a secondary signal the moment we took off. Her stomach dropped. You liar. He shrugged. You're fighting ghosts, Warren. You've already lost. But Alyssa wasn't listening anymore. A faint beeping from the lower console caught her attention. A residual ping on the ETR frequency. The emergency relay she'd used earlier hadn't completely shut down. There was still power flowing through it. She froze. If she couldn't stop the bomb, maybe she could use it. She turned to Carter, eyes blazing with sudden clarity. Lieutenant, route all remaining comms to the ETR circuit. What? But it's offline. Not completely. The signal's still alive. We can hijack the self-destruct channel and piggyback the relay on its frequency. Ma'am, that's suicide. Then it's a good day to be brave, she said sharply. The timer read 3:01. Every second screamed at her now. Sweat dripped down her neck as she reconnected the ETR port, splicing wires together in a blur. The cockpit shook as the engines strained from turbulence. Carter, reroute auxiliary power to the comms. He obeyed, his hands trembling. Done. The console sparked alive, half the lights still flickering. Alyssa pulled up the ETR interface, its screen cracked and glitching, but functional. She began typing the emergency transmission. Code again. Auth W Alpha 47. Priority. Extreme. Message. Sabotage confirmed. Command jet compromised. Trace data source. Imminent destruction. She hit send. Nothing. The screen blinked red. Transmission blocked. Her breath hitched. Come on, come on. Captain, Carter began. Hold on. She slammed her palm against the side panel, jarring loose another cable. The circuit hissed, then flared back to life. Transmission sent. Signal 87% complete. Yes, she shouted. But then Leland lunged. He ripped the power cable from the board, and the cockpit went dark again. No, she screamed. The transmission bar froze at 89%. Leland shoved her back, snarling. You don't get to win. Alyssa staggered, caught herself on the edge of the seat, and swung. Her fist connected with his jaw, sending him reeling. The two grappled again. Punches, shouts, chaos. The plane rolled violently, alarms screeching in protest. Carter clung to his seat, yelling, We're losing altitude. Stabilize. Alyssa shouted, shoving Leland away. She hit the autopilot switch. Nothing. System lockout. They were in free fall. The sky outside turned white from the sun's glare as the plane plunged toward the clouds. Papers, helmets, and gear flew around the cabin. The wind screamed against the fuselage. Alyssa fought her way to the controls. Throttle back. Come on. The altimeter spun rapidly. 20,000 feet. 18,000. 15,000. Leland stumbled forward again, grabbing her shoulder. You'll kill us both. I'll save them all. She shouted, slamming the throttle. The engines roared, and the nose lifted slightly. The descent slowed, but the stress warning blared. Then Carter screamed, Captain, 4,000 feet. She yanked the yoke. The jet leveled just above the mountain ridge, the belly grazing the tops of pine trees. The impact rattled every bone in her body. They were alive for now. A timer blinked. 1:12. Alyssa's mind raced. There was only one way left to stop the detonation. Jettison the core. Every command jet carried an ejection protocol for its reactor to prevent onboard meltdown, but it required access to the under-fuselage bay manually. She turned to Carter. Get to the lower hatch. Pull the manual eject lever. Now. He looked terrified. That's suicide, Captain. It's murder. She met his gaze, her eyes fierce. That's an order. He hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Yes, ma'am. He unbuckled, braced himself, and disappeared through the rear hatch. Leland sat silently now, breathing heavily, the arrogance fading from his face. You're willing to kill your own crew? No, she said softly. I'm willing to die for them. 058. 057. Wind howled through the open hatch. Alyssa could hear Carter shouting over the roar, pulling levers and cranking valves. Come on, she muttered under her breath. Come on. Then a deep metallic clang. The jet jolted violently. Ejectors jammed. Carter shouted. Hit the auxiliary release. Trying 037. Alyssa's eyes darted to the floor hatch panel. Without thinking, she unbuckled and sprinted toward it. Warren! Leland shouted. Don't. She ignored him. She dropped to her knees beside Carter, grabbing the secondary release. Together, they pulled with everything they had. Almost there. 021. The lever snapped into place. A loud hiss echoed through the plane as the reactor core compartment unlocked. A massive clunk reverberated, and then silence. They looked at each other. Did it? Carter began. The timer froze at 012, then reset. 012. 011. 010. Leland laughed darkly from the cockpit. Fail-safe loop. The detonation's remote-controlled. You can't stop it. Elisa's blood ran cold. Her mind raced. Remote-controlled meant radio signal, which meant it could still be jammed. She lunged for the comms. Lieutenant, redirect all power to the ETR frequency again. Max output. Ma'am, that could fry the whole system. Do it. He slammed the switch. Sparks burst across the panels. The lights flickered violently. Alyssa hit transmit again, this time flooding every emergency frequency with static interference. 005. 004. 003. Leland screamed, You'll bring the plane down. Better the plane than the country. The cabin filled with a blinding flash, a soundless, crackling hum, and then silence. The timer froze. 001. The entire jet went dark. Smoke curled from the panels. The engines coughed, then went silent. They were gliding, dead in the sky. Alyssa slumped back in her seat, trembling, breathless. Carter's voice was hoarse. Did we do it? She stared at the frozen timer. Yeah, she whispered. We did. But they were still falling. Outside the window, the horizon tilted, and the mountains loomed closer. She grabbed the controls again, her voice raw but steady. Hang on, I'm not done yet. The silence inside the jet was deafening. No engines. No alarms. No hum of electricity. Just the thin, eerie whistle of air, tearing past the fuselage as they glided through open sky. Elisa's knuckles were white around the yoke. The control panel was dead. Every light, every gauge blank. The plane had become a steel coffin slicing through the clouds. Lieutenant Carter's voice trembled. All engines offline. No power. We're in full glide. Alyssa nodded, breathing hard. Hydraulics? Barely responsive. She tugged the yoke slightly, feeling the sluggish resistance. The nose dipped too sharply, and the horizon spun upward in her window. Come on, she whispered, adjusting again. The aircraft steadied, for now. Behind her, General Leland sat slumped against his seat, watching her with a strange expression, half awe, half disbelief. You can't land this thing dead, he muttered. She didn't look back. Watch me. Outside, dawn had broken fully. The sunlight hit the jet's wings like a blade, revealing smoke trails where the circuits had burned out. Below them stretched a vast wilderness, mountain ranges, forests, and rivers winding through valleys. Elisa scanned the landscape. No cities, no runways, just endless terrain. Carter said, "We've lost transponders too. No one knows where we are." "Someone heard part of that last transmission," she replied firmly. "They'll be looking, but not fast enough," he whispered. The altimeter, one of the few analog instruments still working, ticked downward to 9,000 feet and dropping. Elisa's jaw tightened. "We need flat land. Anything we can use as a runway." Carter leaned over the window, scanning. There, that valley. Maybe a dry riverbed. She followed his gaze and saw it, a long stretch of rocky ground cutting through the forest like a scar. It wasn't perfect, but it was their only chance. She nodded. "Mark it. We're going in there." Leland finally spoke, voice low but steady. "Even if you make it down, Captain, you won't survive the aftermath. You attacked a superior officer mid-mission. You stole command property. You'll spend the rest of your life in a cell." She shot him a glance over her shoulder. "Maybe, but at least I'll live with what I did. Can you say the same?" He didn't reply. For the first time, Elisa saw doubt flicker in his eyes. Carter's voice interrupted the moment. "Altitude 6,000. Speed dropping too fast. Feather the flaps," she said. "Manual overrides jammed. Then use the emergency wheel. Crank it by hand." He struggled with the mechanical wheel near his seat, muscles straining. The metal squealed as the flaps slowly extended. The plane jerked, nose lifting slightly. "That's it," Elisa shouted. "Hold it there." Sweat poured down her forehead. Her arms ached from the constant pull of the controls. 5,000 feet. The trees below were clear now, a sea of green rushing up at terrifying speed. The riverbed loomed in the distance. Leland muttered, "You'll never make it." Elisa ignored him. Her focus narrowed to the shape of that valley, every contour, every shadow. Her instincts took over. She'd trained for engine failures. She'd practiced glides and simulators. But never like this. Never with her country's fate hanging in the balance. At 4,000 feet, she started her descent pattern. "Carter, deploy landing gear, manual crank." He spun the lever furiously, but only one indicator flickered on. Left gear down. Right side's jammed. She grimaced. "We'll land uneven." "Ma'am, that'll tear the plane apart." Better torn apart than exploded. The nose dipped again. Wind screamed against the windshield. 2,000 feet. Elisa's mind was calm now. Every second slowed, her breathing even and controlled. She could feel the weight of the jet, sense its inertia, its wounded soul. It wasn't just metal. It was a living thing struggling to survive with her. "Hold steady," she whispered to the plane, as if it could hear her. "You've done your part. Now let me finish it." Leland closed his eyes. "You should have been one of us, Warren." "I am one of us," she said quietly. "That's why I couldn't follow you." He looked up, meeting her gaze. For the first time, there was no anger, only a hollow respect. "Then finish it." The dry riverbed rushed toward them, uneven, rocky, but wide enough. "Carter, brace." She yelled. Braced. 1,000 feet. The jet tore through the last layer of clouds, wind buffeting the fuselage. Elisa gritted her teeth. "Come on, girl. Just one more mile." The nose dipped slightly. Too much. She pulled back hard, every muscle in her arms burning. The yoke creaked under the strain. 500 feet. The ground screamed up at them. She angled the flaps full, fighting drag. The left landing gear hit first. Crash. Bouncing violently. Sparks flew as the metal scraped across stone. The right side slammed down seconds later, folding under pressure. The plane skidded sideways, engines tearing into the earth. Debris exploded around them. The fuselage ripped open with a roar of shredding steel. Alyssa held on, teeth gritted as the world turned into chaos. Smoke, dirt, fire. Then, silence. She blinked slowly, ears ringing. The cockpit was half collapsed, glass shattered. Smoke filled the air. "Carter!" She coughed, unbuckling her harness. I'm okay," came his voice from the side, hoarse but alive. She turned. Leland was pinned by debris, bleeding from his arm but conscious. "Can you move?" she asked. He gave a weak laugh. "You?" "Landed it. Not exactly smoothly, but you did." He looked out the broken window, at the burning wreckage around them. "You may have just saved everyone, Warren." She didn't respond, just crawled toward the rear hatch. Her hands were shaking, lungs burning. Outside, the wrecked jet smoked in the cold morning air. The mountains stood silent around it, like ancient witnesses. Carter stumbled out behind her, clutching his side. "What now?" he asked. She gazed at the sky, where faint contrails streaked high above. Maybe search planes, maybe not. "Now," she said quietly, "we tell them the truth." Hours later, the rescue choppers found them. Elisa barely remembered the sound of the rotors or the shouts of the medics. Her vision blurred as she was lifted onto a stretcher. The last thing she saw before blacking out was the black box, its light still blinking steadily among the wreckage, recording, remembering, bearing witness. When she woke, the world was white. Hospital walls. Soft monitors. The steady beep of her heartbeat. Her body ached, but she was alive. A uniformed officer stood by her bed, Colonel Draper, the one who had warned her days ago. He smiled faintly. "You've made quite a mess, Captain." She tried to speak, her throat dry. "Did they?" "They got your signal. 90% of it." He paused. Enough to trace the transmission. Enough to know Leland's operation was real. Relief washed through her like sunlight after a storm. "And the troops?" She whispered. "Safe," Draper said. "You stopped an ambush that would have killed thousands." Command intercepted the external transmission minutes before it reached its destination. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Where's Leland?" Draper's face darkened. "In custody. He'll live long enough to answer for what he did." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They'll call you reckless. They'll say you broke every rule. But between you and me," he smiled slightly, "you did what needed to be done." Elisa gave a faint smile. "That's all I ever wanted." He nodded. "Rest now. The world owes you one, even if it doesn't know it yet." As he walked away, Elisa turned her head toward the window. Outside, the morning sun rose over the mountains, the same mountains that had nearly been her grave. But she was alive, and because of her, so were thousands of others. She whispered softly, "We made it, Dad." The world outside the hospital moved on quickly, but for Captain Alyssa Warren, time crawled. Every minute since the crash had felt heavier than the last. The debriefings, the sterile rooms, the whispering officers outside her door. When she was finally discharged, they didn't take her home. They took her to Washington. The interrogation room was small, windowless, and cold. A single recorder blinked on the steel table. Elisa sat upright in her blue hospital-issue jacket, her wrists free, but her spirit weary. 3 men and 1 woman in military uniforms entered the room. Their badges glittered, brass and authority. The lead officer, Colonel Hayes, didn't sit. "Captain Warren, You're aware of why you're here. She nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Because I disobeyed direct orders and took control of a military aircraft. Among other things, he said, flipping open a folder thick with reports. Hijacking. Assaulting a superior. Endangering classified material. You nearly crashed a multi-million-dollar defense asset. Her voice was calm. I also prevented a rogue general from betraying our country. The female officer, Major Klein, leaned forward. That's what you claim. But General Leland insists he was following a covert operation authorized by Central Command. That he was in communication with a special intelligence cell. Elisa's jaw tightened. That's a lie. I saw the transmission logs myself. He was sending encrypted data to foreign channels. Hayes crossed his arms. You believe he was, but most of that data was destroyed in the crash. Not all of it, she said quietly. The black box recorded everything. The officers exchanged glances. Klein pressed. Captain, the black box was damaged. Its data isn't fully recoverable. Then someone made sure of that, Alyssa shot back. For a moment, the room went silent. Later that night, they left her alone. The small clock on the wall ticked softly, the only sound in the concrete room. Alyssa stared at her reflection in the mirrored glass across from her. She knew someone was watching, probably multiple people. Her mind replayed every moment of the flight, every warning Draper had given her, every coded message that didn't make sense at the time. She had risked everything for the truth. No, that truth was being buried. The next morning, she was escorted to a private hearing room inside the Pentagon. Unlike the cold interrogation space, this one was grand, polished wood, flags behind the panel, and the faint smell of coffee and formality. At the center sat General Margaret Doyle, head of Internal Affairs. Her presence was commanding, her gaze sharp. Captain Warren, Doyle began, you have earned the respect of many in this building. You also caused one of the largest security incidents in years. We intend to determine which weighs more heavily. Alyssa met her eyes. I understand, ma'am. Doyle opened a folder. You were warned by Colonel Draper about a potential internal leak. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. Do you have proof of this conversation? No recordings. Just his word, and mine. And where is Colonel Draper now? Alyssa hesitated. He was the one who retrieved me from the crash site. I haven't seen him since. Doyle's lips tightened slightly. Colonel Draper was found dead 2 nights ago. Car explosion outside Quantico. The report calls it an accident. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her breath caught. No. That can't. Doyle's tone softened, just slightly. I'm sorry, Captain. But this is exactly why we need to be careful. Whatever you stumbled into, it's bigger than you realize. Alyssa clenched her fists on the table. Then why silence me? We're not silencing you, Doyle replied. We're protecting the nation's integrity. Sometimes the truth complicates things. Alyssa's voice cracked. Thousands of soldiers were saved because I didn't listen to orders that were compromised. How is that a complication? Doyle sighed, closing the file. You did what you thought was right. And maybe you were. But if this goes public, if people think the chain of command is broken, it could destroy faith in the military entirely. That night, Alyssa sat in her assigned quarters, a guarded room inside a military base outside D.C. She couldn't sleep. Draper was dead. The truth was fading. And Leland was alive, hidden somewhere under protection. Carter had been released days earlier. She hadn't seen him since the crash, but rumors said he'd been reassigned quietly. She walked to the window. Floodlights washed over the compound walls. She felt like a prisoner, though officially she was under observation. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Warren. A voice familiar, distorted slightly, came through the static. Captain. Listen carefully. They're moving Leland tonight. Her blood ran cold. Who is this? Someone who still believes in Draper's mission, the voice said. Leland's convoy leaves at 2,300. They're not taking him to court. They're taking him out. What do you mean? Someone wants him silenced, permanently. If that happens, the evidence dies with him. The call ended abruptly. Elisa stood frozen. Her instincts screamed. This wasn't over. She changed quickly into plain clothes and slipped into the corridor. 2 guards stood outside her door, talking quietly. She approached calmly. Command asked for me in the comms room, she lied. I'm supposed to check the recovered black box. 1 guard frowned. We weren't notified. Then call them, she said, keeping her voice even. But if I'm late, Doyle won't be happy. That did it. They exchanged a nervous look and stepped aside. Elisa walked briskly down the hall, heart pounding. Every turn, every hallway felt like a test. At the end of the corridor, she reached a side exit. She slipped out into the cold night air. Outside the base perimeter, she found a maintenance truck idling and Carter in the driver's seat. Her eyes widened. How? He gave a crooked grin. Let's just say your mysterious caller found me too. You trust them? No, but I trust you. For the first time in weeks, she smiled faintly. Then let's finish this. The night was thick with fog as they followed the convoy. 3 black SUVs heading down a deserted highway. Elisa watched through binoculars. They're not going to any courthouse. Carter nodded grimly. That road leads to a decommissioned airstrip. Exactly what I feared. They kept their distance until the convoy turned off onto a dirt path. Elisa parked the truck behind a ridge. From there, they could see it. An old hangar, lights glowing faintly inside. Through the haze, figures in black tactical gear surrounded Leland's vehicle. They weren't military police, they were private contractors. Elisa's gut twisted. They're going to kill him. Then what do we do? Carter asked. She pulled a small recorder from her pocket, the one she'd salvaged from the wreck. We get proof. Then we stop them. They crept closer, moving between rusted equipment and stacks of crates. Elisa crouched near the hangar's open door. Inside, Leland was on his knees, hands bound. One of the men stood over him with a silenced pistol. This wasn't the deal, Leland rasped. The man replied coldly, You were never supposed to survive the crash, General. Elisa hit the record button. Her pulse raced. Every instinct told her to stay hidden. But watching another execution after all this? Impossible. She stood, leveled her pistol, and shouted, Step away from him. The mercenaries spun, surprised. Carter burst from the side, firing a warning shot that ricocheted off a steel beam. Drop your weapons. Elisa yelled. A firefight erupted. Bullets tore through the hangar walls. Elisa dove behind a crate, returning fire. Carter flanked left, taking down one of the gunmen. Smoke filled the air. Sparks rained from broken lights. When it was over, silence fell again. The mercenaries lay scattered across the concrete. Leland sat shaking, blood on his hands but alive. Elisa approached him slowly. Who were they? He looked up at her, fear in his eyes for the first time. People higher than both of us. They wanted me gone before I could testify. Then you will testify, she said fiercely. Tomorrow. They escaped before reinforcements arrived. The recording she'd captured, the voice of the man saying, You were never supposed to survive the crash, was undeniable proof. For the first time, the truth had teeth. By dawn, Elisa handed the recorder to General Doyle personally. The older woman listened in silence, her face pale when the tape ended. Finally, she said, "You just opened a door we can't close." Alyssa met her gaze steadily. "Then it's time we stop pretending it's locked." The morning sun filtered through the blinds of General Doyle's office, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Captain Alyssa Warren stood rigid, the small recorder clutched in her hand like a lifeline. She had spent weeks battling bureaucracy, secrecy, and threats from people whose faces were hidden behind power. Now she faced the moment where everything would change. Doyle's expression was unreadable. "Captain," she said quietly, "the evidence you've provided. It confirms what we feared. General Leland's betrayal wasn't an isolated incident. It involved actors within our own ranks, people who wanted him eliminated, and who would have erased the truth with him." Alyssa swallowed hard. "Then it's time the world knows." Doyle hesitated. "Are you prepared for the consequences?" "Even with proof, there will be fallout. The military, politicians, and media, they will all have opinions about your methods, your defiance." "I made choices based on what was right," Alyssa said firmly. "Not what was convenient." Doyle nodded slowly. "Then we proceed?" The next day, the press briefing was tense. Every camera, every microphone, seemed to pierce Alyssa like 1,000 eyes. Reporters had heard rumors, but the details were classified. Until now. General Doyle stood beside her, face grim but resolute. "Today, we released the details of a failed internal operation that was discovered thanks to the courage and quick action of Captain Alyssa Warren." The room erupted with flashing cameras. Reporters shouted questions, but Alyssa remained calm, steady, her voice echoing with confidence. "The evidence shows that certain elements within our command structure attempted to transmit classified information to unauthorized external parties. Captain Warren's intervention prevented this transmission and saved countless lives." A hand raised in the back. "Captain Warren, did you disobey direct orders?" "Yes," she said simply. "And if disobeying orders meant protecting lives, I would do it again." The murmurs rippled through the room. Some faces were skeptical, others inspired. Alyssa's heart pounded, but she held her head high. In a secure facility, Leland awaited his fate. The man who had once seemed untouchable now sat shackled, facing charges that could end his career and possibly put him behind bars for decades. Alyssa stood behind the glass, watching him. He looked up, eyes meeting hers briefly. No arrogance, no charm. Just a man who had misjudged loyalty and morality. "General," she said quietly, "it's over." He gave a weak nod. "You saved more than you know." "Captain." The hearings were brutal. The military tribunal reviewed every detail of the flight, the sabotage, and the crash. Leland's accomplices, high-ranking officers who had orchestrated the external transmissions, were called out one by one. Alyssa testified clearly, calmly, without embellishment. She detailed the hijacking, the confrontation in the cockpit, and the desperate measures taken to prevent disaster. She also revealed the recording from the night she and Carter intercepted Leland's convoy. The words of the mercenaries were irrefutable, exposing the corruption hiding in plain sight. By the end, even the most skeptical officers couldn't deny the facts. Outside the tribunal, a reporter asked her, "Captain Warren, do you have regrets?" She paused, thinking of the jet spiraling through the sky, the lives at stake, and the friends she had risked everything for. "No," she said finally. "I don't. I trusted my instincts. I trusted what was right. That's all I can ask of myself." Cameras flashed, capturing her steely resolve and the quiet dignity she carried despite the chaos she had endured. Weeks later, Alyssa walked along a quiet mountain trail, far from the city and the media frenzy. Carter joined her, carrying 2 canteens of water. You did it, he said softly, handing her a drink. We did it, she corrected, smiling faintly. I couldn't have done it alone. He chuckled. Somehow, I knew you'd make it out alive. Even when things looked impossible, you never stopped. She laughed quietly, thinking of the cockpit, the flares, the spinning plane. I thought I was going to die that day. And yet here you are, he said, eyes scanning the horizon. Alive, still fighting. Still making the world right. Elisa looked at him, then at the mountains stretching endlessly before them. She thought of Draper, of Doyle, of the thousands of soldiers whose lives she had saved. Yes, she whispered. Alive, and maybe for a reason. In the following months, Leland and his collaborators faced formal court-martial. Many were stripped of rank, imprisoned, or publicly reprimanded. Their attempt to manipulate the military's highest levels became a cautionary tale, a story of betrayal and redemption. Elisa was honored privately, her medals pinned quietly by General Doyle. Public recognition was limited. The classified nature of the operation meant much of her heroism would remain hidden from the wider world. Still, she didn't mind. Justice had been done, lives had been saved, and the truth had prevailed, even if only partially. One evening, she received a letter from a young cadet at the Air Force Academy. It read, Dear Captain Warren, I don't know you, but your courage and integrity have inspired me. I want to serve in a way that protects others the way you did. Thank you. Elisa smiled, holding the letter close. The war, the betrayal, the near-death experience, it had all led to this. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her drawer, a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing wasn't about recognition, it was about legacy. Years later, she returned to the mountains where she had landed the crippled jet. The scars on the earth were gone, nature reclaiming the valley. She stood on the ridge and looked down at the riverbed that had once been the floor of a near disaster. She felt the wind on her face, the quiet strength of survival, and the weight of choices that had defined her life. A voice beside her spoke softly. You know, the world doesn't always see heroes, Captain. But some of us never forget. She turned to see Carter, older now but still by her side. I don't need the world to see, she said. I know I did what I had to. He nodded, eyes reflecting the same mountains she had flown over so long ago. Elisa breathed deeply, letting the air fill her lungs. She had stared death in the face, fought betrayal, and emerged stronger. The truth had survived. Justice had survived. And she, somehow, had survived too. For the first time in what felt like years, she smiled freely. The mountains stood silent, bearing witness to a story of courage, loyalty, and the unyielding power of one person willing to fight for what was right. Captain Elisa Warren turned away from the ridge, leaving behind the valley, the wreckage, and the ghosts of betrayal. Ahead lay a future she had earned, one carved from courage, integrity, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes saving the world means standing alone against everything. And she was ready.